Życzymy Państwu przyjemnej podróży.
Są takie książki, które zamiast dzielić w ciszy, łączą w dyskusji. Wyostrzają obraz, zamiast go zamazywać. Są wehikułami idei i początkiem nowej opowieści. Takie właśnie polskie książki Fundacja Batorego co roku wyróżnia nagrodą imienia Marcina Króla. Jednocześnie zaprasza do debaty o tym, jak dziś wygląda świat i w jakim kierunku zmierza. Do spotkania różnych światopoglądów, środowisk i idei. Do ważnych rozmów, w których biorą udział redakcje, autorzy i czytelnicy. To z książek i z dialogu ponad podziałami powstaje nowa opowieść, której tak bardzo potrzebujemy. O tym między innymi pisał Marcin Król, filozof polityki i historyk idei. Czytaj, co myślą inni. I myśl, co czytasz. A potem dołącz do dyskusji.
Welcome to another debate organized by Foundation of Stefan Batory. The topic and the main discussion is going to relate to Ukrainian issues. In this case, European integration of Ukraine. What's Polish role in this respect? How do we define this role? What do our friends from Ukraine expect from us? And I believe that this discussion can begin in such a wonderful, among such wonderful panelists, namely Marek, Prawda, Secretary of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Maryna Jaroszewycz, Deputy Head of Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. Madam Mariya Zolkina. She has already participated in the debate 2 years ago during our conference. She analyzes policy, and we can often read her comments, not only in Ukrainian papers, so you are very happy you're here with us. Andrij, Deszczycia, probably many of you know his role that for years he was performing as the ambassador of Ukraine to the Republic of Poland. He is still commenting the political reality. Recently, an important text was published in Enve regarding issues that were very emotional. Inter alia, those related to Wołyń. And Piotr Buras, Director of Warsaw Office of the European Council on Foreign Relations, that works closely with the Foundation when it comes to European topics and integration of Ukraine to European Union. My name is Edwin Bendyk. I am the president of the Batory Foundation. I will not be investing much time into my introductory note. I only want to say that the last months showed that Polish-Ukrainian relationships, well, it comes to the strategic dimensions of providing assistance to Ukraine, it doesn't change, but the ongoing relationships have their dynamic, which is being shaped by different impulses. There was a crisis related to grains. Recently, we have a very hot discussion on exhumation and tragic moments of history. In the forecast, we still have Polish presidency at the European Union, and the accession process. We are waiting for the negotiations to begin. We hope that the negotiations are going to begin during the Polish presidency. How will it be? What is the position of the Polish government? We can ask the representative of the government. Therefore, I want to begin the discussion with giving the floor to Minister so that we can have something to relate to during our next following part of our discussion. Thank you very much. Welcome. What's going on in Ukraine is Europe and the world. In order to speak about assumptions of Polish policy towards Ukraine, we have to say a couple of words about changes, the general changes. So we are beginning with the big picture, because our policy towards Ukraine is simply a conclusion of crisis and events. What changes are most important? Those that impact our politics towards Ukraine. Well, the way how Europe is thinking about Europe has changed. For 30 years, we've had Europe that so tomorrow is a better version of today. We were assuming that it will only be better, quicker, or slower, but better. And this was the world where we were able to focus on development. We were able to focus on evening out the life conditions, and this is how European Union saw its role as an important input to something that's important to everyone, and a possibility of impact or an impact that is derived of it. We were saying that Europe needs someone who will be connecting the groups, the poorer with the richer, that are within Euro and outside of Euro. So here we were focusing on development, but Russian aggression on Ukraine has changed the hierarchy of the priorities. Right now, what's the most important is security, even though Europe is not an alliance for defense. But it's changing from being a factory of rules to a commonwealth of faith. It means that security and defense are becoming a priority. Therefore now, Poland, which has new crucial role and has to redefine it in the current world. The world and the changes have a lot in common with Ukraine in general. Those were, to a big extent, appointed by Ukrainian lessons that we've learned. The first one is that democracy has to know how to win wars. And we have to defend peace and democracy with all our might. Otherwise, we will be confronted with the other forces. It's different than we thought, that there would be no world where what's most important is the number of tanks you have, or that we used in post-heroic world, post-nationalistic world. Well, not. The world doesn't want to be as we paint it. So this is the first lesson on Ukraine. The second are zones, gray zones of safety. After '89, there were indeed the gray zones of safety, but we thought that we can live with it. Today it's different. The world has changed in such a way that we have a very sharp line and a demarcation line, and we cannot accept having gray zones of safety, because those will be a natural invitation to Russian imperialism. And that's it. This means that Europe has no other way, no other option. Europe has to strengthen its attempts to ensure security to the countries that are in between Union and Russia. Here I'm also thinking about the Balkan states. This is why EU enlargement now has a completely different dimension. It's geopolitical necessity We speak today of enlargement that will be costly, but it will still cost less than lack of enlargement. It was not this way. When I used to work in Brussels, they were saying different things, that we cannot afford enlargement, let's take a rest from enlargement. So this is a change of paradigm that, of course, has been caused by Russian aggression on Ukraine. Now, when it comes to enlargement, we treat the enlargement by adding Ukraine and Moldova. We treat it as accepting partners, adding partners who ultimately are donors of safety for us, donors of stabilization for us. But so that they would become the donors, we have to first give them a lot. So this challenge is a challenge how to talk about it so that people would believe it. And there are branches which are afraid of competition, of Ukrainian competition. Plenty of those fears, as we believe, can be mitigated during the accession process.
About that we will say a little bit later, but now I don't want to say about accession. I think we will go to that later. In the end, just one another remark from a bird's eye perspective, from a general perspective of looking what changes. So what have changed is that Europe has to try to avoid a false peace based on illusions. I have many friends, for instance, in eastern lands in Germany that tell me that you need to be patient and wait and do something to please Russia and then somehow try to make a deal. We now know without any doubt that Russia will not happy because they don't want to be happy, because they are building an axis of angry countries. That would be an alternative to what we have now, to what is precious for us, because West is not a threat because what West is doing, but because what West is. And it needs Ukraine as a buffer, unstable, as a weakened state, because it works in a polarization logics, coexisting with enemy, calls for an unstable partner who would separate us. It's completely different logics. So in a conflict of two civilizations, it's like without a contact point, there is no space for compromises, and there is a need of effective threat. At this point, I would like to finish summarizing Ukrainian lessons that decide upon Polish policy about Ukraine. Just last sentence from my side. It means that Poland and Ukraine is combined. In the world, I tried to determine a commonwealth of faith, interests, and a commonwealth of value. And now we can argue about I don't know how many things, but we cannot and we shall not forget that they are a second, 3 or 5 in a row thing, if we compare it to the most important, a core commonwealth of faith. Now I would like to ask Maryna Jaroszewycz to comment on what Mr. Minister said, and at the same time present how, from your perspective, European integration scenario of Ukraine looks. How do you see the role of Poland? In what extent it corresponds to your vision?
Dziękuję bardzo. Good day, everyone. I would like to start, first of all, by thanking to Poland about the role that it has played, about the assistance it has provided, and about keeping Ukraine so high on the European agenda. And I would want to talk today about the triangle or a square, and I'll explain why I use these geometric figures in my discussion to finally explain where we are headed and why I think this is important. So the topic of the panel today is European integration. And if we were having this discussion before, let's say, 2014 or even after, the discussion would be dominated by reforms that Ukraine is doing or is not doing that well, you know, and like how can the European Union stimulate or assist and then assess or evaluate, you know, and help kind of Ukraine progress. Then full-scale invasion happened, and we add a second corner, yeah, of this triangle. Ukraine is at full-scale war, and hard security starts dominating the debate. How does Ukraine survive? How does it continue existing and keeping its independence and sovereignty while still keeping the track of European integration? So here there are already two pieces, yeah, of the puzzle. And then the third piece that comes into play when we talk about Polish role of helping Ukraine is also coming to terms with the past, and also, well, having bilateral track of relations. And of course, we cannot swipe it under the rug. We cannot throw it out of the window. So there is also a very long history of our powerful and beautiful nations and our relations that have sometimes also gone sour. And we hear loud and well the announcements, or let's say the claims of Polish politicians that in exchange for the support that you've been providing, you also expect some sort of understanding, comprehension, and steps, you know, that would help us come to terms with the past and move towards the future. But I also have now to give this fourth corner that makes a square for Ukrainians. For us, it's also important in all this to preserve our democracy. So not only state as a territory, but also democracy as a notion, democracy as a value, rule of law that you were, values and, you know, rule of law that you were saying that has united us. And that is possible only under the condition that we win the war. Because, again, it has been debated several times, you know, whether Ukraine can, for instance, afford having elections in times of war. There is no clear decision that has been made, but it looks like while we are in such an active state of war, we cannot continue with, for instance, you know, presidential or parliamentary election. So we keep the status quo in this regard. But we keep the status quo. And for instance, should Ukraine fail, so should Ukraine lose, we would not be able to talk about democracy. And if we are not able to talk about democracy, we are not able to talk about partnership and relations and coming to terms. So like now there are still institutions that are functioning. Yes, they have lessened capacity to deal with situations. And I mean, I'll be honest with you that, for instance, this very important and delicate debate that we are having about the past, it's not that it doesn't matter or it's not important, it's just on our plate, everything that we have on our agenda, it would not be the top priority. But it doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just that in this triangle or square that I've now drawn to you, our survival is has the highest priority. And not only survival, because again, you can survive, but you can have a frozen conflict, or you can survive, but you can have a negotiated peace that was negotiated from the position of weakness, and this is also not we can afford. survival only, not survival, so victory. This is what can unpuzzle or untangle all other things. So when the question was asked, and I will finish my, introductory intervention with this, when the question is asked, what do Ukrainians ask of Poland today, we also ask about just this comprehension of the complexity of the situation that we've been dealing. And what we expect is to give us more time, or let's say more grace period, in order to put all things in place and then sit peacefully together and come to terms with all the rest of the things. So in the upcoming Polish presidency in the Council of the European Union, we do really much hope and expect to have Poland as not only an ally, but the strongest voice, the strongest advocate like it has been. And we do hope that recent down in the relation will not persist, but that at this point in time, again, we will move on and come back to dealing with these issues only after Poland will have to will do everything in its power to push and promote Ukrainian interests at the EU level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Later there will be a chance to relate to that of those who started the discussion. But let's continue. I now address Ms. Mariya Zolkina. From perspective of your own analysis of the situation, how you assess the path of Ukraine to European Union and the role of Poland, what we can really do, what you would expect from Polish presidency in European Council.
Dziękuję ślicznie.
Yes, thank you very much. I will keep speaking in English. But if I am a guest on next Freedom Games, I promise that everything will be in Polish then.
I think that in a number of pretty emotional and pretty sensitive topics which are being discussed in Polish-Ukrainian relations for the last year and a half, at least, let's say. So we are really underestimating the role of defense and security cooperation, which is most probably is the only one field where none of the sides, neither Warsaw, no Kyiv, neither an expert, nor political, and also nor on a society level has no controversies, no problems, no contradictories, because we have common interests, we have the common enemy, and we have the common task. And paradoxically, the most sensitive and one of the most vulnerable policies on the supranational level, at the level of the European Union, I mean the policy of common security and defense policy, which was also always struggling from resistance of the national member states and national governments to contribute the part of their sovereignty to this field and to transfer their right to take specific independent decisions when it comes to defense and security. Paradoxically, this area is progressing right now, and it might be, and I believe it should be, one of the main tracks when it comes to Polish and Ukrainian cooperation on the way of Ukraine towards the European Union. What I would like to see more from both sides, from both Ukrainian and from Polish side, more cooperation here, more strategic setting up specific strategic goals for the future to come. We have extremely fruitful cooperation when it comes to not just transfer of what Ukraine asked for from Poland in the field of defense and security, but specific mechanisms which were silently dead or almost silently dead on the level of the European Union, they became activated, not to the scope we probably expected, but still they are moving in the right direction. Non-budgetary mechanisms to support member states while they were supporting Ukraine. So-called non-direct military support, which goes not from European Union budget directly to Ukraine, but to the member states. This was activated exactly because the European Union had to play its role in supporting Ukraine, repelling Russia's attack. Practical tasks on the level of preparing Ukrainian armed forces to repel those attacks of Russia and to be more resilient in the midterm future to come. This also was mostly based on unwillingness of two specific states to provide facility and provide all possible resources to accommodate those practical exercises for Ukrainian forces, I mean among the European Union member states. And one of them was Poland. The third thing, which is really new one, I think that the Poland has been acquiring right now a role of, so to say, practical coordinator, not just between European Union on the one hand when it comes to defense and security, and Ukraine on the other hand, but between European Union, NATO, and Ukraine. And the new systems of coordinating what support is being provided to Ukraine, what data is being accumulated to support Ukraine-related programs, all this either was already set up here in Poland or will be set up in the nearest future. And what I think is really lacking from informational agenda, from mass media, is how close the cooperation on all these things, and this list is not exhaustive, which I mentioned. We really lack this. When we turn on TV or when we read media outlets, both in Polish or in Ukrainian, we see different topics there, mainly when it comes to relations between two states. But what I see that practically we have a good foundation to have completely different strategic agenda. And the last but not least, for introductory remarks, I think that more understanding is really needed, not just in other topics, but when it comes to defense and security as well. I do believe that from Ukrainian side, there is probably not that much yet understanding how important is that for our Polish counterparts to hear that Poland is not just a temporary partner for Ukraine unless we win this war with Russia, but that Poland will stay a strategic partner for Ukraine for the years to come, especially and mainly because there is a gap, and this gap will be preserved. How Western European states, except for UK probably, potentially France in several years, maybe, depending on their political situation. But otherwise, there is a gap. How serious the eastern flank of NATO, the Scandinavian countries are accepting the threat which is being presented by Russia to them, especially in case Ukraine falls. And the position which is being reproduced by, as Minister say, by many, for instance, in Germany. So the threat is from Russia is not being considered to that high extent of dangerosity and risk like it is perceived, for instance, here in Poland. These peculiarities, they exist, but I believe they should be the basis and the foundation for Ukraine and Poland to cooperate much closer and to present to its societies how communication and better coordination between two capitals will make it beneficial for both states and both societies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You know perfectly well Poland and Polish politicians, so we are going to relate this perspective to what Mr. Minister said. To which extent do you perceive it, that there is a difference between strategic things, as Mariya said, that we will stay one next to another, and this requirement of strategical outlook will be stronger than other tensions that arise from obvious reasons? Are we able to construct our policy in such a way to have something stronger that will allow to find looser atmosphere in the conflicts? I will speak Polish. I hope I didn't forget my Polish yet. If you invite me to another edition of the conference, I will speak English or maybe Ukrainian. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for your invitation to the Freedom Games, and thank you to the Batory Foundation for the fact that the Ukrainian topic is so important on the agenda of the games, of this edition of Freedom Games, and I hope that this is going to continue in the future. This is an important topic. It gathers plenty of audience, and it's a very up-to-date discussion. I also want to repeat and echo what my four speakers said. I want to thank you very much for the support of Poland that you have provided and you still are providing to Ukraine. In Ukraine, we for sure expect a continuation of the support and assistance during Polish presidency at the European Council. Also, when we are going to begin and continue negotiations on accession to the EU. But I want to come back to the most important topic that we discussed already, or mentioned at least. This is the most important question, without which we will not be able to solve bilateral relationships or Ukrainian accession to the EU. It is end of war. It is winning the war. It's important for both Poland, Ukraine, but also for Europe and the whole democratic world. If we don't win the war, then the other things are not going to become true, are not going to be solved. Winning the war, the way I understand it, it means guarantee and safety for Ukraine. Of course, responsibility of Russia and Putin for breaking international law, for the victims and destroying infrastructure, for occupying. But without guarantee of safety, we cannot, I can at least not imagine, implementing European strategy for Ukraine, because I'm afraid that at a certain stage, EU will not support Ukrainian membership in the EU if there will be not guarantee of safety, unless Ukraine gets to the safe zone where the whole of Europe is. What does it mean to win the war for Ukraine? Well, in my opinion, it's an invitation. And in the future, membership of Ukraine in NATO. Without that, I doubt there can be anyone else to guarantee security that we've gotten used to on the European continent. This is why continuation of Polish assistance and of a continuation of EU assistance to win the war still has to be the most important thing, also during the negotiation process. Another thing that I would like to draw our attention to are matters related to threat for accession process. Besides for war, economic situation in Ukraine, reforms which are very challenging during the war, and also tensions in relationships, not only with our neighbors, but also with other member states of EU. I think it's normal, because as I mentioned, too much energy and resources are being spent on the war, and this is why less goes to the other affairs. Of course, questions such as ultimates, which we obtain when it comes to accession of Ukraine to EU, are not helpful in bilateral relationships and create lack of trust. Because still in Ukraine, as I mentioned, there is belief that Poland is a promoter of Ukraine, that it's our lawyer, that it provided so much assistance in reforms of Ukraine, and it helped during the war, and Poland is a window of Ukraine to the EU. I believe it is going to continue this way. Why are there those tensions? Difficult moments in conversations in between governments and politicians, because certain issues are not solved. We can solve them, though, pretty quickly, with a decision that requires political approach to those things. Here I'm speaking about the prohibition of exhumation, and I'm in favor of resigning on this ban. Just like all the barriers that are in between nations and states are not helping to have a dialogue, will not help solving difficult issues. Are those questions going to remain on the agenda? For sure. But whatever radical activities will not help are not helpful to the talks. Another thing that I would like to speak about are the questions of the new role played by Poland in relationships with Ukraine. Poland, for years, has been providing assistance to Ukraine in accession to European Union. But right now, Poland is going to be in front of a very difficult challenge, which is changing the status, because besides for being a promoter, Poland is also going to become a partner or maybe even a competitor. And we see it, whether it's about agriculture, or the matters related to transportation or construction or logistics. So this is going to be a competition. And Poland has to face it, that Ukraine is becoming a strong country that will be competing, that you will need to have a dialogue with, like two equally important partners in the member states of European Union. And it seems to me that, of course, it can all be solved, but conversations of good competition can exist, like they do in the EU, because if Ukraine, or rather when Ukraine becomes a member state of EU, then we will have same rules, same legislation in Ukraine and Poland, and then we will be able to solve those questions accordingly to the European legal framework. Now, Piotr Buras, a representative of Collective Europe. There are certain specifics when it comes to Poland in the EU that we define differently because of the proximity of the threat. We understand better what's at stake of the war and what it is about. We understand it better than the Western European member states. When you look at the European policy and politics, how do you assess what your four speakers said, and how do you find role of Poland in this process? What can we really do here? What are the cards we can play? 3 points I would like to list here, which seem interesting to me in the context of what my four speakers said. First, relates to relationships between enlargement of EU and Ukraine winning the war. Because Maryna said very rightfully that since if Ukraine wins the war, then there is going to be democracy in Ukraine. And Mr. Ambassador said that without unless Ukraine wins, then there will not be any accession to EU. And me being analytic, and also the position of the EU, of the Polish government, sees no different. Poland supports the definition of Ukraine winning the war, and also it supports attempts of NATO membership of Ukraine. So Here there is no difference of interests. The problem is elsewhere. There are many other countries which are opposing to it, especially the most powerful ones. The most powerful states in NATO don't see such an option. So Ukraine winning the war is not a question that is relative, but there are different measurements of winning, of victory. The future of integration, the fact that Ukraine will surely integrate with the European Union, this is one of the most important measurements and most realistic way of measuring whether Ukraine won the war or not. So if membership in NATO in the nearest future will be very difficult politically to achieve. Winning the war, meaning regaining all territories, which right now, unfortunately, it looks like that seem to be very difficult to get back. If Ukraine is to win the war, it has to be sure that the forecast of integration with the European Union is feasible. I believe that from Polish point of view, from the point of view of EU, from the perspective of narrowly understood interests of Poland or EU, there is no democratic, stable, foreseeable Ukraine without being sure that Ukraine in the future will become a member state of the European Union.
In other words, if Ukraine is to lose European perspective or losing the belief that this is a realistic scenario, I would be really afraid of a future of stability, not just of a democracy, but generally stability of Ukraine, and at the same time future of interest and of safety of Poland and other countries of European Union. So in my opinion, we need to think about, if we think strategically from perspective of expanding, enlarging EU, or from Polish perspective, we need to think about realistic goal of enlarging as one of the most important factor to be a victory of Ukraine in this war. And that brings me to another point, because unfortunately a balance of enlarging policy of EU in the last decades is terrible. So the probability of enlarging policy was a minimum or even none. Balkan state turned away from European Union. They were less and less interested in joining EU because they believe this perspective is not possible, not credible. They don't want us at all, so why should we try and struggle in a bit simplification? And there were a lot of problems from Balkan states' side when it comes to this enlarging process during last years, but also the lack of honest and interested policy from the side of EU, where particular interests were stronger and rather no wish to expand. So if the credibility of European perspective is so relevant, we need to take care to change this perspective, so that in case of Ukraine it is different than in case of North Macedonia, Albania or some other countries, because this risk is still present. And that leads me to a third point related to Poland. If we ask what Poland can do, I feel that we focus too much on what Poland can do on the level of European Union. Of course, it is important, we need to do a lot, but what is also important is what we do inside our country. Because, as Mr. Ambassador said correctly, this enlarging process will generate different tensions, different conflicts of interests between Poland and Ukraine as well, regular conflicts of interests. But if we consider this first point that I mentioned, that strategically for Poland and for Ukraine this European perspective is absolutely crucial, then we need to prepare our society so that these particular interests were not stronger than this strategic interest. And here I agree with Mr. Ambassador about a question of what you called ultimatum. Some Polish officials of highest rank informed during recent weeks public opinion or addressed messages to Ukrainian side that I consider to be harmful. If Poland sends a signal that joining EU should depend on solving some bilateral, historical or graveyard-related matters, this is unfortunately a policy that can be compared to what Greece applied towards North Macedonia or Bulgaria towards North Macedonia. I wanted to highlight that I don't think it's some kind of a new line of Polish policy. I think Mr. Minister would agree with me. It's not that it's some kind of a new line of Polish policy, that now we will make perspective of Polish membership in EU dependent on Volyn case. But sending these messages to societies is counterproductive, is against the strategic goal that Poland has to fulfill. So I think that on the level we have to do a lot on the level of internal debate in Poland. It's avoiding this kind of signals and preparing the society that this strategic goal is also related to several certain challenges. And another thing, I'm summing up already, but we speak too much about this moment of membership. What will happen when Ukraine will become a member of EU? But we speak too little about what will happen in a time in this quite long period before Ukraine become a member of EU, how to build a policy, EU policy, during nearest couple of years. I don't want to give any specific dates because that's pointless, but to form this policy in a way that Ukraine was invited, incentivized to reform, to apply all needed solutions so that Ukraine can feel that more and more, together with the advances, Ukraine uses the cooperation with EU, and so that the perspective of membership stayed credible all the time. So these are different possibilities that can be discussed broadly, but those are the efforts of Polish diplomacy to focus on designing this path of Ukraine to European Union, because the condition of that, it is a condition of credibility of this process. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Mr. Minister to comment, and then 1 minute comment from colleagues from Ukraine, to just to relate to what they just heard, just like as a summarization. Okay, very quickly. I remember our conversation before accession EU, mainly with our partners from Germany, that supported us so much, and we applied. We also asked about historical justice. We showed geopolitical benefits that they will have after they accept us, that we gave away our market, and we complained that they behave like bookkeepers and milkmen, and they have no conscience whatsoever. When it came to milk questions, they had no mercy to us, and they explained to us it's two different things. Our friendship is one thing, and this process, this road through suffering, it's necessary, because otherwise we and others would not win the referendum. Societies cannot be comforted by some distant benefits of accepting Poland, because they say to us that they will die or they will go bankrupt until they will see these bright benefits of Polish membership. And this is a debate that we are having with our partners now from Ukraine. these transitional benefits, privileges that Ukraine, of course, need to have, they created a world that for many professional groups become a threat, or they recognize this as a threat for their economic safety. So the only thing that can be done is as soon as possible to enter this accession process, because it will create what Andrij said, Andrij Deszczycia, that Ukraine, being a subject of European regulations, will be in the same club and will suffer the same rules, obligations, responsibilities. But then all that is possible because there are transitional periods, there are different measures to calm down. Germany had 7 years of derogation until Polish people could start working there. In the end, it turned out not so necessary, but that's how the world looks. And today our Western partners will say the same, that we need to win all these referendums so that Ukraine would not receive any barriers to join EU. So the responsibility is to explain at home what Piotr Buras said, the necessity of certain costs, and the responsibility of Polish government is to be a part of reforms that can make Ukrainian membership in EU beneficial for both sides. In turn, from Ukrainian government, we expect, well, managing the expectations, explaining the society all the necessities to win referendums of acceptance. Now we create a dialogue group, bilateral dialogue group. We want that to offer our partners in Ukraine to look at Ukrainian perspective, having experience of Polish path, how to bypass all the potential problems. I will just say shortly that we have an ambition to open first cluster of 5 sectors in first half of next year. We discuss next 2, of course, that we would like to prepare as fast as possible. I don't know how much we can do, of course. Piotr, just 30 seconds, please. I forgot to comment on that. I believe that Polish position is clear. Poland would like to be an honest man in the middle. They want to have this process in such a way that all the requirements in these clusters, in chapters, are clearly determined. It's everything about freedom of speech, about the rule of law, and there's nothing about ultimatums. It's not definitely a line of Polish government to press any ultimatums. It would not fit Poland, basically. Thank you very much. Now the request to Ukrainian participants for 1 minute to relate, maybe comment about what Mr. Minister said.
If we talk about Ukraine, Ukraine needs to win. That was, I think, the consensus among all the panelists. But when we talk about EU in general, EU needs to become enlargement ready. Because in all the previous accession rounds, it was true that EU is a prosperity project. EU is so it has kind of all the economic attraction, and for any applicant, it was necessary kind of to become a good pupil in order to join this club of prosperity. But today, as it was also spoken here, for EU to enlarge, this becomes a geopolitical necessity. This is a stress test that EU needs to pass on a global arena to prove that it is capable of having this, change in power. But in helping others, it also needs to prepare itself. So my reflection to the second round is also that today EU also has its homework to do. And it's not a question whether EU will enlarge, yes or no, but it's a question how and when. So this is also the task for the upcoming weeks, months, years to come.
Thank you very much, Ms.
I would
Mariya.
like to underline here that we should not underestimate the role in several years from now, which relations, basically the relations of war between Ukraine and Russia will play for European Union enlargement and for especially Ukraine's accession. Because right now we think that Russia will not have any capacity to prevent anyhow Ukraine's accession to the European Union. But in case Ukraine is being cornered to start not necessarily direct, but indirect, tactical, narrow, thematical negotiations about something like a ceasefire, which is now in the air everywhere, and Ukraine is really under great pressure with limited resources and all this stuff. In case this scenario is in place, at some point when we will be very, very much in progress with our accession negotiations and closing up the chapters of the clusters, Russia will take this card again. I have no doubts here. And that's why I think Ukraine and its closest allies within the European Union, interested most of all in Ukraine's integration, not just in the European Union, but in NATO as well, should not be coming down, but should be doubling down on demanding the security architecture around Ukraine to be clear as soon as possible, because otherwise we will be in a sleepy condition from several years from now. And at some point, for the same reason, Russia is and was blackmailing Ukraine with war, demanding Ukraine not even to think about NATO, accession to NATO, with the same logic. In 4 or 5 years from now, Russia will start blackmailing Germany, Hungary, Slovak Republic, and we can't imagine whom else. This is the same logic. Like there is a common security and defense policy. We are against that. So make an exemption for an exclusion for Ukraine from those fields. So I think there is so much complicated scheme here. And that is why exactly the European Union enlargement is not just a formal process, but it still consists of a very huge political component of political willingness and decisiveness of our partners. I do believe Poland can help Ukraine here and be one of those loud voice demanding not just EU accession for Ukraine, but also NATO one.
Very briefly, I agree with Piotr that we have to think in a strategic manner and implement strategic goals. We have to win the war together. We have to enlarge EU. We have to add Ukraine to EU. We have to help Ukraine to get accession to NATO. And I also begin that we have to maintain strategic relationships between Poland and Ukraine. I am sure, and I will remain sure to the end of my life, that if not Poland and Polish society at the beginning of the war wouldn't be going as well as it is. So we are so thankful to you that you helped us in the first difficult months. Thank you very much. We've exceeded our time, but we've been speaking about particularly important things, so I hope we'll be forgiven for that. I thank very much to our guests from Ukraine, from Poland, for the discussion. Thank you for sharing so many important things. And of course, we are only beginning the discussion. It's not the end of the discussion. We hope that the wishes and declarations will come true, and that in the future, during the future meetings, we will only be moving towards bigger extent of integration and Polish participation in moving it forward. We don't want to go down winding roads, but rather right straight direction. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And
Rodzina spółek Pelion to 12 000 osób pracujących w ponad 300 spółkach w Polsce, Szwecji, Wielkiej Brytanii i na Litwie. Jesteśmy liderem w branży ochrony zdrowia. Od 1990 roku dbamy o długość i jakość życia. Pracować z nami możesz w jednym z 7 obszarów.
Czy wytrzymasz klockowe tortury? Ze stoickim spokojem. Czy w twardych negocjacjach zachowasz zimną krew? Czy poddasz się dobrowolnej eksmisji ze swojego łóżka? Brawo! Test na obecność serca zaliczony. To znaczy, że ty też możesz być rodzicem zastępczym. Dowiedz się jak na testserca.pl.
Polskie Radio.
1.
Zapraszamy do Trójki. Od nowa.
Trójka. Program Trzeci Polskiego Radia.
Plany biznesowe powstają z marzeń. Dlatego nie ma dwóch takich samych firm. Jedni chcą działać na całym świecie. Innym cały świat mieści się w dłoni. Sukces biznesu to nie tylko jego wielkość, ale też szczęście, jakie przynosi ludziom. PKO Bank Polski.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Uwielbiam szycie w sieci. Wczoraj podszyłem się pod wnuczka, wieczorem uszyłem intrygę na apce randkowej, a dziś planuję grubymi nićmi szyte oszustwo z promocją. Tak się szyje.
Na oszustów są sposoby. Zapoznaj się z poradami ekspertów na niedajsiepodszyć.pl.
Jedzą kanapki z kawiorem.
Nadzwyczajna kasa.
Obrażanie dziennikarzy telewizji polskiej.
Chodzi o działania polityczne.
Przygotowanie ofiar dla pedofilów.
Für Deutschland.
TVP Info. Włącz się na nowo.
Radość, nadzieja, życie, wyzwanie, pasja, pamięć, zaufanie, pokój, jedność. Słowa tworzą świat. Polskie Radio. Źródło wiarygodnych informacji.